Hey guys, Xlice here. I got the chance to test out Linnea and her big cupcake Lumi on Genshin Security Experience Server for Luna 6 or version 6.5. We're closing in on our Lunar Duo team comps with Flynn's Inefa for LC, Neferlama for Lunar Bloom, and now Zubai Linnea for Lunar Crystallize. And you know how a Bnefa is considered wheelchair for Lunar Charge comps? Well, Columbina plus Linnea, or Binea combined, is basically wheelchair for Lunar Crystallize comps. This means most on-field Geo DPS besides Zubai can be carried by this duo and perform decently well. In this video, I'll provide you as much knowledge as I can on what Linnea does, how to play, how to build, how to gear, how to team, how to Linnea. Disclaimer, all things filmed are on Creative Experience Server and subject to change for full release, so keep that in mind. Let's get into it. Alright, Linnea is Geo and a pure defense scaling sub-DPS healing support for Lunar Crystallize comps. Similar to what Inefa and Llama are for Lunar Charge and Lunar Bloom, Linnea provides very similar fundamental buffs to the Lunar Crystallize team comp while also dealing a super juicy amount of damage herself and granting sustain to your comp without incentivizing constellations. Now, before her release, the ideal Lunar Crystallize comp was Zubai, Bina, Iluga, plus Goro, Shielan, and Zhongli Flex. Linnea now shifts things around, becoming the core unit alongside Columbina for the Crystallized comp to buff Zubai or whatever your main choice of DPS is. Moving Iluga to the flex role that is now interchangeable for Goro, Shielan, or Zhongli. Now, Iluga C6 is still one of the strongest options, but now is less valuable than Linnea. So, let's go through a kit breakdown. Just FYI, I love to use the test dummy in Miliastra, but for Creative Experience Server, the function is unavailable if you are testing new characters, so you will be seeing footage from familiar HP sponges I like to test against. So, Linnea is your typical EQ swap off-field sub-DPS character, with a little extra happening on her elemental skill, which summons her Cupcake Lumi that will stay on field for a good amount of time, 25 seconds, and deal consistent geo damage. So Lumi has 3 forms that depend on your inputs. If you just tap E, Lumi is summoned in super form, dealing a mix between normal geo damage and lunar crystallized damage. If you decide to continuously tap, which is like spamming the elemental skill button or your E button, whatever you play on, or spamming left click or your basic attack, after the first elemental skill where you summon her, Linnea will start feeding Lumi gemstones to transform into ultimate form that deals a massive lunar crystallized nuke. After this nuke happens, Lumi deflates to standard form, dealing only normal geo damage. There's no longer lunar crystallize in it. So basically, if you use the spam version, it will give you a huge initial damage nuke, but it will then make Lumi a lot weaker afterwards since she won't be dealing any lunar crystallized damage in standard form for the remainder of that duration until you resummon her. Now, not being able to lunar crystallize afterwards until her next skill usage is kind of not great in extended fights, so I'd reserve using this nuke only if you want to show off or do some screenshot damage. This nuke can very easily hit upwards of 500k at C0, which is very, very juicy, so you can totally build around it if you want for big Lumi damage. In general though, for Columbina, Linnea, wheelchair comps, I would just tap E into burst and call it a day. Now, on the topic of her burst, this is just used for continuous healing and refreshing the duration of Lumi. So while it says it does summon Lumi in super form, the bottom here says if Lumi is already on field, her strike form will not change. This means we cannot do something sneaky like doing a big skill nuke and then resetting Lumi's form with burst. If we could do that, then it would always be optimal to skill nuke if you have the burst available. Since this is not the case, we do want to remain just tap E in most rotations. So overall, her gameplay is very standard. It's a EQ swap, or in this case, just a tap E and swap. Burst will only be necessary if you need the healing. Now for extra passive benefits. A1 provides Geo Res Shred as long as Lumi is on field. 15% by default, increased to 30% if Ascendant Gleam is active. A4 provides EM bonus to either the active character or herself based on 5% of her defense. This means 2000 defense is a 100 elemental mastery buff. There doesn't seem to be a cap here, so extra defense substats are very welcome to push this value as high as you can. Now for who gets the buff, if the active character has Moon Sign, they will get the buff. If they don't have active Moon Sign, Linnea will get it. This will obviously change dynamically depending on who you're on field with, so it's not like some snapshotable thing. And then her passive talent is the usual lunar crystallized conversion and base damage increase up to 14%. So that's basically her kit in a nutshell. For talents, I'm gonna be honest, none of them actually matter. If you only care about the buffs and debuffs, those are on the passive talents. The talent levels only scale damage and healing. So the skill will increase Lumi's damage, and the burst increases the general healing. Damage does matter for team DPS, so I'm going to prioritize skill into burst and then normal attack, like usual. Alright, now let's take a look at her weapons. So the bow department isn't the greatest for defense scalers. So besides her signature, we're probably going to go for basically just heavy crit stat sticks. The rarity of them also doesn't matter since she doesn't value the attack at all. When we take a look at her signature, it provides 88.2 crit damage, 16% defense, self 40% Geo and lunar crystallized damage, and then team 20% Geo and 20% lunar crystallized damage. So it's a crazy good stat stick for her, but it also buffs your teammates. Now, other options. Any weapon that has crit on the secondary stat is going to be useful. Huge ones like this. For crit rate, be a little bit careful because you can overcap on crit rate. It's dangerous. But for things like Aqua Simulacra, you got 88% crit damage, which is really nice. If we're talking about actual choices though, one of the best F2P ones is going to be Slingshot because your basic attack doesn't matter and the passive honestly doesn't matter either. 31.2% crit rate is really, really nice though. It's easy to build around. 4-star Snare Hook is also pretty good if you do value the recharge. But if you do use this weapon, I would say try to avoid energy recharge on her artifacts because 61% is more than enough. I forgot to mention that her burst cost is only 60. And the reason why I didn't mention is because it is technically an optional thing if you just need the healing. But with 60% recharge, it should be pretty stable. And then finally, Stringless is okay just for the EM. One thing I will say, I do not recommend Elegy. The value that this provides is pretty low. You'll be destroying her personal damage for the 100 EM, just isn't worth it ever. So, just my opinion. Yeah, that's basically it for weapons. I didn't mention stat percent on each of them because she can only really benefit from crit, and her signature is the only weapon that specifically has stat tailored to her. So pick it up if you decide to, otherwise go for one of the more budget options. Now running through artifacts. So my preferred build is going to be 4-piece Moon. This is the same as Inefa's best set, and functionally, that should make sense because Inefa and Linnea have identical roles on the team. For Lunar Crystallized comp, Geo main DPS will be running 4-piece Sky. Most likely this is Zubai. Haha, get it? Sky and Zubai? So sorry, I did that in the Zubai guide too. 4-piece Serenade will be either on Columbina or Iluga if you have Iluga at C2 or higher. Ideally, Iluga is on 4-piece Serenade or Instructor, doesn't really matter. And remember, with Iluga, his C2 allows him to actually deal damage during his elemental burst. And then Columbina will be on 4-piece Moon if Iluga is on Serenade, or Columbina will default to 4-piece Serenade if you want Iluga to hold Instructor. For me and my setup in this demonstration, we're going to have Iluga on Serenade so that both of them can hold 4-piece Moon. If you don't like this set, don't want to farm it, whatever, you can go with the standard 4-piece Husk set for general defense and geo damage. If you don't like that either, if you don't have any of these, you can just go 2-piece defense and 2-piece EM. Very straightforward. Her main stats, it will be defense, defense, crit. There's basically no other alternative since she's very stat lenient. Crit rate mask will be most likely since her signature is crit damage. We want to get as close to like 80-90% as possible. And of course, slam as much defense as possible for the A4 buff. Energy recharge is going to be optional. Depends on if you want to burst to heal every rotation or every other rotation. So when you've got a full build, this is what you can approximately expect. Above 2000 defense, higher the better. 0 or higher EM from substats, 80% or higher crit rate, as much crit damage as possible because she is dealing a good chunk of damage herself, 0 or higher energy recharge. Overall, as you can probably see, her stat requirements are like some of the most lenient since the only ability that matters is her skill. This kind of reminds me of Shilonen. If you remember how Shilonen was built back in the day, Shilonen is also super stat lenient and Linnea is going through her idol again. Now, a Constellation breakdown for those interested. Feel free to skip forward if you just want to see her in action. So, for your reference, a Moondrift Harmony is when the constructs summoned by Lunar Crystallize deal damage. It is mentioned multiple times in these constellations and synergizes quite well with Linnea's vertical scaling. Those are the 3 totems that are summoned. So, C1. Using her skill, or when Moondrift Harmony does damage, Linnea gains 6 stacks of field catalog that improve Lunar Crystallized damage for 10 seconds, max 18 stacks. 1 stack will be consumed when Lunar Crystallized damage is dealt to increase that damage based off of 75% of Linnea's defense. This is effectively the same as how Lauma uses her EM to boost Lunar Bloom damage. For Linnea, it's her defense that boosts Lunar Crystallized damage. Now, if Linnea herself uses her big skill nuke, she can instead consume up to 5 of her own stacks to increase that damage by 150% each, up to a max of 750% of her defense. C2. Hydro and Geo crit damage increased by 40%, and the big skill nuke from Lumi gets a further 150% crit damage for a 190% total boost. From here, this big skill nuke should be doing a comfortable 1 million plus chip damage, which is really nice for an off-field sub DPS. And for rotation purposes, the combination of C1 and C2 should make it better to use her skill nuke instead of the tap skill for overall team DPS. You'll see in team showcases how close the damage is for just C0. In Ascendant Gleam, dealing damage with her super form or ultimate form will now also proc an extra Moondrift Harmony that will deal extra damage and forcefully apply both Hydro and Geo application. C4, 25% extra defense for Linnea and the active character. If Linnea is also active, she'll get both bonuses for 50% defense total. And then C6. C1 is enhanced to provide all 18 stacks immediately when using her skill, and subsequent Moondrift Harmony activations will also refresh all 18 stacks. And now, twice the stacks are consumed to boost Lunar Crystallized damage by 150% of the original value. This means that normal Lunar Crystallized damage instances will consume 2 stacks and are boosted by 225% of Linnea's defense. This also means that her skill nuke can now consume up to 10 stacks, dealing 225% Linnea's defense per stack, capping to 2,250%. Okay, so first off, apologies for a bunch of the numbers here. Basically, Lumi, which is her cupcake, deals a fat amount of damage now, and that skill nuke that Linnea can provide should also hit like a giga truck. Not exactly sure how much right now, but I think there's potential for 2.5 to 3 million at C6 or even higher possibly. At C0, she can easily hit 500,000 at 680% defense multiplier at level 10. C1 gives 750% more, so theoretically 1 mil plus. C2 gives 150 to 190% crit damage on that attack. C3 gives plus 3 levels to it. C4 gives defense. And then C6 improves C1's stack to 2,250%. So yeah, she's gonna hit a lot, especially as a sub DPS. I'm pretty excited to try her out, C0 to C6. That video will be posted on second channel. Alright, so now let's see how she performs on the battlefield. I have 6 setups that I'm personally interested in. This is not an exhaustive list of team comps possible with her, it is more so a comparison of what happens when you swap just like one thing from her team each time. Our primary lineup is going to be Xlice, Columbina, C2 Aluga, and Linnea. And then we're going to be switching a unit at a time to really see where the team DPS comes from. So first we'll start with best in slot before Linnea was released, which is this setup, and then we're going to switch Goro for Linnea to see the damage increase. Then we're going to replace Aluga with Goro to see how close our 4-star supports are to each other. Aluga is C2 here, and Goro will be C6 on the swap. Then we're going to do a skill nuke versus tap skill demonstration to show the minor team DPS difference. And then we're going to swap Aino for Columbina to see how much the team loses. And then finally, a BNF wheelchair with just these two, combined with C2 Aluga and using C6 Noelle as our on-field Geo main DPS. Overall, these setups should give a really good visual on the effect of different setups. Just a reminder that any on or off-field Geo character can replace Noelle in this last demonstration. It is meant to showcase the strength of just Columbina and Linnea with some sort of support like Aluga Goro, and then the carry potential of this comp with someone else. This includes characters like Navia, Ito, Chiori, Albedo, Zhongli, or even Ningguang. Alright, so for character setups, Xlice is going to be on 4-piece Sky in Signature for all setups. Columbina is on 4-piece Moon in Signature for all setups. Because Linnea does heal, Prototype Amber is no longer necessary for Columbina. Linnea is on 4-piece Moon and Sig for all setups as well. Iluga, Goro, and Aino will be on some variation of 4-piece Serenade or Instructor, depending on the setup. We do need one 4-piece Serenade user first, of course. Iluga will be set at C2 for all showcases so that his abilities can deal damage so that it can use 4-piece Serenade. And when each showcase happens, refer on screen to any specific layouts for each character because they may slightly change from team to team. Alright, so first up we have the pre-Linnea setup with C2 Iluga and a C6 Goro. This showcase is very similar to the Xlice guide video, just slightly improved since Iluga is C2 here and Columbina is on Signature. If you are running Columbina on Prototype Amber, the boss HP change is going to be like 2%. So we're going to have typical setup here with Abina EQ into Iluga EQ into Goro EQ for max instructor uptime with Goro last. Then we go into Xlice's rotation. So, Xlice's ultimate 332k burst and her enhanced skill is about 277k with all buffs active. Alright, so that should be basically the rotation finished here. The boss HP is about 35 to 37% consumed, which is expected. Alright, so now we're going to include Linnea over Goro to see the damage improvement. She's going to be on 4-piece Moon. So we're first going to do a simple tap skill into burst rotation. So you'll see right here, Aluga EQ, Linnea Tappy into burst. Alright, so Lumi's doing some 120Ks. Our burst from Xlice is doing a 313K, a 317K, and then her enhanced skill is doing 260K with all buffs active. As you guys can see, overall, the damage is really nice. Finishing the rotation, Lumi is still going because that's the active duration, which is quite nice. But you guys can see that the damage total is almost 50%. Even though Xlice's personal damage is slightly lower than with C6 Goro, the overall team DPS significantly improves with Linnea's buffs and chip damage. Alright, so now here's an identical version with skill nuke. So you guys will see right here, it's gonna feed and then boom, 508k. So pretty nice here. Xlice's damage is going to be basically identical. But yeah, Linnea with Lumi hits that 500,000 initial damage nuke. And you'll see here that Lumi doesn't deal any more lunar crystallized damage. So yeah, you guys can see just looking at Lumi, its attacks are a lot less frequent. And the damage is going to be slightly lower because Lumi overall, with her extra attacks, does deal more damage than skill nuke. Remember though that this is going to be C0 Linnea. At C1 or C2, I do anticipate it will be more worth it to nuke at the start since her scalings are more nuke favored. Like she gets more multiplier bonus and she gets a massive crit damage bonus on her skill nuke. Alright, so now let's return to the tap skill and we're going to replace C2 Iluga with C6 Goro. He'll be on Serenade so that we don't lose any buffs. Alright, so tap skill like usual here. Let's watch Xlice's damage. So EQ. First is 398k and her skill is about 325.5k. You can see that at the bottom there. And if you see Lumi's damage as well, Lumi's also doing like 140k. Pretty nice. So if you take a look at this, the total team DPS is almost identical. We're at almost 50% HP consumed again. And you guys can see significantly higher personal damage for Xlice. So it looks like for C2 Iluga and C6 Goro, this is where they kind of have like an even balance point. So once you start getting C3 plus Iluga, it should outscale Goro. Alright, so now for the last two showcases. First up, we're going to use Aino to replace Columbina. She's going to be on 4-piece Serenade here with Iluga on 2-piece EM. Unfortunately, I do have to initiate this rotation with Iluga since Aino's Hydro application has much shorter duration and would run out too early if she set up first. Alright, so let's see Xlice's personal damage here. So we're leading off with 308k. And then a 256k skill. And then Lumi's Pound here is doing 99.6k. Their damage didn't suffer that much, but as you guys can see, the total team DPS is quite a bit lower. So after things finish, this is basically the cap. It's about 30% of the boss HP. Still pretty doable, all things considered. But of course, without Columbina, it looks like the team loses about a third of its strength. All right, and then final showcase is going to be the Linnea wheelchair. So Bina Linnea. We're not focusing on Noelle's personal damage here because she herself does not do Lunar Crystallize. She's just the on-field driver for this comp and deals extra geo damage. She's still going to be running 4-piece Sky though, with good crit scaling gear, so we do get those lunar reaction bonuses. But her weapon is going to be Favonius Greatsword to ensure our team has 100% energy uptime. All of the damage that you're going to be seeing is coming from off-field here, and it's honestly not that bad. So first setup. All right, so Noelle is going here, and she is just doing her best, man, as you guys can see. So her personal damage is going to be about 15k, but she is the driver for lunar reactions. And I'm just doing N3D over and over and over again. Honestly, not that bad. If you take a look at it from just the duo support comp, I mean, it's effectively like replacing Columbina with Aino, but a little bit weaker. So you guys, let's maybe like 25, 27% of the boss HP consumed. This is a duo support comp, right? It's Columbina plus Linnea. And obviously, if you have C6 Goro, you probably have access to those two. So you can do this comp literally right away if you don't have Xlice, and it would still perform like not bad. Alright, so that's all of my showcases for Linnea. So a couple takeaways from these comparisons. Linnea's damage improvement to the Lunar Crystallize comes at honestly no surprise. She's exactly the core duo that the comp needs to effectively field competitive strength to Nefa and Lauma for their respective comps. I also find it cool that C2 Aluga is basically the same team DPS as C6 Goro, because hopefully this allows you to not feel too stressed out if you don't have Aluga right away. And I appreciate that both versions of Linnea's skill is strong enough to not feel too obvious that you need to play her one way. If you prefer skill nuking because you like big numbers, do it. It's definitely satisfying, and you lose minimal animation time on charging it up. And if you want it to feel stronger, you could invest like 1 or 2 cons into her. So, what do you guys think? My closing thoughts: if you're interested in Lunar Crystallize, really like Zibai's playstyle, or are an old school Geo DPS main that wants to be a little up to date for the now, then Linnea is a must pick up for those comps. Linnea is basically the new Geo team archetype that enables any other Geo ally to have a good time. The damage output seems comparable to both Flynn's and Nefer in their respective comps, and I'm very interested to see how strong C6 Linnea is. Otherwise, I would consider her to be fairly easy to build, has FTP weapon options, a relatively easy build path in terms of stats, so feel free to pick her up as long as you have Columbina to enable this duo. That's gonna wrap it up for this early access review guide and showcase. Let me know in the comments what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe for future releases and gacha summon videos. And I might see you on my C0 to C6 Linnea showcase, which will release on my second channel. Thanks for watching, and take care.